In the first 6 months of 2024, a mountain in Washington state woke up. Not with fire, not with ash, but with a silent, relentless trembling deep within its core. From February 1st to June 18th, the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network recorded approximately 350 tiny earthquakes beneath Mount St. Helens, a swarm. A vibration in the rock peaking at 38 events per week, too small for any human to feel. News reports flashed with warnings of an impending eruption. Geologists spoke of a process they called recharge. And for months, the world watched, waiting for the explosion that never came. But here is the detail that tells the real story. As we speak, in the summer of 2026, 46 years after the last great cataclysm, a team from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is working on the Toutle River. They are not volcanologists. They are civil engineers armed with a multi-million-dollar contract. Their job is not to watch the volcano. Their job is to fight it. They are raising a massive dam by 10 feet, a fortification against a flow of rock and mud unleashed by an eruption that ended before many of them were born. The strangest part of this story is not that Mount St. Helens is shaking again. It is that the 1980 eruption never truly stopped, and the war against it is still being waged every single day. The shaking is not the threat. It is a symptom of something larger building miles beneath the surface, a process that is loading the volcano for a completely different kind of eruption, the one nobody expects. To understand what is happening to the most active volcano in the Cascade Range, you have to understand the silence. The current alert level, issued by the USGS Cascades Volcano Observatory on July 3, 2026, is normal. The aviation color code is green. On the surface, the mountain is quiet, a fractured monument of rock and new growth forest. But between 2.5 and 6 miles below the crater floor, something is flowing. Magma, originating in the Earth's lower crust, is pushing its way upward, pooling in a reservoir of molten rock. As this chamber slowly inflates, it stresses the surrounding crust. The rock cracks. It shifts, and each tiny fracture sends a seismic signature shuddering up to the surface. This is recharge. Think of it not as a prelude to eruption, but as the volcano inhaling. The process is not new. It is the volcano's natural rhythm. Similar earthquake swarms occurred from 1988 to 1992, again from 1995 to 1996, another pulse from 1997 through 1999. The swarm of early 2024 was simply the largest and most concentrated since the mountain's last eruptive phase ended in 2008. Dr. Seth Moran, the acting scientist in charge at the Cascades Volcano Observatory, defines this as normal background seismicity. The volcano is not failing. It is building. It is accumulating the energy it will need for its next act. And that is where the memory of 1980 becomes so critical. Because the last time this mountain fully exhaled, it did not do what anyone expected. Before 832, and on May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens was known as the Fujiyama of America, a near-perfect cone of snow and ice, a symbol of Pacific Northwest tranquility. It was born from the grinding mechanics of the planet, where the Juan de Fuca plate slips endlessly under the North American plate, melting rock and feeding a chain of volcanoes up the coast. For 123 years, it had been dormant. Then, on March 16, 1980, the first tremors began. A week and a half later, on March 27th, a steam explosion blasted a 1,300-foot crater through the summit's ice cap. Over the next 2 months, the situation escalated. The north face of the mountain began to swell outwards at a rate of 5 feet per day, a grotesque bulge of rock and ice pushed from within by rising magma. Authorities established a red zone, an exclusion area for public safety, but the science of predicting volcanic blasts was, at the time, a discipline in its infancy. The hazard maps all assumed a traditional eruption, a vertical plume of ash and gas, a column of fire and rock shooting straight up into the atmosphere. The danger zone was drawn accordingly, a circle around the summit. At 8:32 and on Sunday, May 18th, a magnitude 5.1 earthquake shook the mountain to its foundations. It was not the eruption, it was the trigger. The oversteepened, bulging north face, the largest single feature of the mountain, catastrophically failed. It collapsed in the single largest debris avalanche in recorded history. In one moment, the entire top 1,300 feet of Mount St. Helens simply slid away. That landslide was like pulling the cork from a champagne bottle. It instantly depressurized the superheated, gas-rich magma stored within the volcano's crypt. And the resulting explosion did not go up. It went sideways. A lateral blast, a searing wave of gas, ash, and pulverized rock shot out directly to the north, moving across the landscape at an initial speed of over 300 miles per hour, accelerating as it expanded. It was a stone wind, heated to over 660 degrees Fahrenheit. It leveled 230 square miles of dense forest in under 10 minutes. Mature Douglas firs, 6 feet in diameter, were snapped off at their bases like toothpicks. 5 miles away, at an observation post on a ridge later named Johnston Ridge, a 30-year-old USGS volcanologist named David Alexander Johnston saw it coming. He grabbed his radio. He had just seconds. His final transmission to the USGS base in Vancouver, Washington, was stark. Vancouver. Vancouver. This is it. Then, silence. The ridge he stood on was directly in the path of the blast. He was vaporized. Nothing of him or his equipment was ever found. This is the part the history books often get wrong. The blast did not just destroy. It outmaneuvered. It shot sideways, overtopping ridges and flowing around hills, completely ignoring the circular red zones drawn on the maps. The official death toll was 57. It was, and remains, the deadliest volcanic event in United States history. But here is the haunting statistic. Of those 57 fatalities, 51 of them were located outside the designated restricted zones. They were campers, loggers, photographers, residents who believed they were in safe areas. They died because the mountain did not behave the way the models predicted. Years later, USGS geologist Richard B. Waite would confess the profound sense of guilt felt by the scientific community. "We all have blood on our hands," he said, reflecting on the scientists who suspected a larger, more complex blast was possible, but failed to convince authorities to expand the danger zones. The most famous holdout, 83-year-old Harry R. Truman, owner of the Mount St. Helens Lodge on Spirit Lake became a folk hero for his defiant refusal to evacuate. He had lived on the mountain for 54 years and scoffed at the warnings. He, his lodge, and his 16 cats were buried under hundreds of feet of the debris avalanche. His story is one of defiance. But the stories of the other 56 are of betrayal. They were betrayed by a mountain that broke the rules. And that single terrifying fact that the volcano did not obey the maps is what fuels the intensity of the monitoring today. The 1980 eruption fundamentally rewrote the science of volcanology. It proved that a mountain could fail laterally. It forced a complete overhaul of hazard assessment worldwide. In its aftermath, the David A. Johnston Cascades Volcano Observatory, the CIVO, was established in 1982, a direct response to the catastrophe, a promise to never be caught off guard again. Zoom out, and the consequences of that day in 1980 are still unfolding in real time. This is not ancient history. It is an ongoing engineering crisis. The debris avalanche that buried Harry Truman did not just fill the valley. It dammed the outlet of Spirit Lake, the large body of water just north of the crater. The lake began to rise, threatening to overtop the unstable debris dam and cause a catastrophic flood and mud flow that would endanger the 300,000 residents living in towns downriver. To prevent this, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers drilled a 6-mile-long, 11-foot diameter tunnel through a mountain ridge in 1985 to provide a new, stable outlet for the lake. It is an immense piece of infrastructure hidden inside a mountain, a permanent hydraulic scar from 1980. Now, here is the part nobody is putting on the news. That eruption over 4 decades ago is still trying to flood those same communities. The pyroclastic flows and lahars dumped billions of tons of sediment into the North Fork Toutle River. Even now, in 2026, that sediment continues to wash downstream with every major rainstorm, clogging the river channel and increasing the risk of massive floods. This is why the USGS is back. In early 2026, they awarded a contract for approximately $30 to $35 million to raise the height of the Mount St. Helens sediment retention structure, a colossal dam built specifically to trap this 1980 debris, by another 10 feet. Construction began in mid-2026. The completion date is set for October 2027. It is a race against erosion, a battle of concrete and steel against a 46-year-old river of mud. Mount St. Helens is a zombie disaster. It was killed in 1980, but its corpse keeps trying to attack the living. The mountain's instability is not just hydrological, it is physical. The main road to the Johnston Ridge Observatory, the SR 504 Spirit Lake Memorial Highway, offers the most famous public viewpoint into the crater. On May 14, 2023, a massive landslide, composed of unstable 1980 debris, completely wiped out the Spirit Lake Outlet Bridge and a huge section of the highway, cutting off access to the observatory. It took until April 2026 for contractor crews from the Washington State Department of Transportation to even begin the permanent rebuild. The road is expected to reopen in the fall of 2026. This was not a volcanic event. It was the mountain's geological ghost, a landscape so profoundly shattered that it is still collapsing under its own weight. This constant, sprawling, multi-million-dollar effort to contain the legacy of 1980 is the backdrop for the new seismic activity. The recharge happening 6 miles down is not an isolated event. It is the next chapter in a very long story. And it adds a new layer of uncertainty, because the volcano today is not the same one that erupted in 1980. Most people believe Mount St. Helens went back to sleep after the big eruption. It did not. From October 2004 to January 2008, the volcano experienced a sustained, continuous eruption. There were no cataclysmic explosions, no lateral blasts. Instead, magma slowly and persistently extruded into the crater floor, like thick toothpaste being squeezed from a tube. Over 4 years, this process built a new lava dome inside the vast amphitheater-like crater, left by the 1980 collapse. It was a quieter, constructive phase. The mountain was rebuilding itself from the inside out. And this creates a profound, unanswered question for volcanologists today. The 1980 lateral blast was possible because the north side of the mountain was the path of least resistance. Now, the crater has been partially plugged by the new dome from the 2004-2008 eruption. So when the pressure from the current recharge cycle finally builds to a critical point, where will it go? Will that new dome act as a cork, forcing a future eruption to be a more traditional vertical blast? Or is the new dome itself a weak point? A structural flaw that could fail and trigger another lateral event? Or could it be something else entirely? The simple truth is, nobody knows for sure. The mountain continues to play tricks on those who watch it. On September 16, 2025, air traffic controllers and pilots began reporting a massive ash plume rising from the summit. Panic briefly rippled through monitoring agencies. The volcano was erupting again. But it was a phantom. Strong, dry winds had swept across the crater, picking up loose, 45-year-old ash left over from 1980 and throwing it thousands of feet into the air. A ghost eruption. The volcano was completely quiet, seismically inert, but its remains were still potent enough to mimic a real disaster, a haunting reminder of the power contained within even its dust. The work of the USGS and the CIVO is relentless because the stakes are so high. A vast network of seismometers, GPS stations, gas sensors, and cameras blankets the mountain. forming one of the most intensely monitored volcanoes on Earth. They measure every tremor, every fractional inch of ground deformation, every change in the chemical composition of gases seeping from the rock. They are looking for a change in the pattern, a shift from the slow, steady rhythm of recharge to the frantic, accelerating tempo that precedes an eruption. Dr. John Major, a research hydrologist who served as the CIVO's scientist in charge, has studied the volcano since 1981. He has spoken of the resilience of the Earth, how life rebounds even after utter devastation. He has said, no matter how devastating the eruption, Earth always rebounds, and that is visible all over the blast zone. Where once there was a gray, sterile moonscape, there are now young forests, returning wildlife, and streams carving new paths. But the geological system beneath is not rebounding, it is reloading. The magma chamber is refilling. The pressure is building. The cycle that produced the perfect cone, destroyed it, and is now rebuilding it, is far from over. There is one more thing the data does not yet answer: the rate of recharge. While the swarms of earthquakes are classified as background activity, their frequency and intensity provide clues about the volume of new magma entering the system. The 2024 swarm was notable for its density. It suggests a robust supply of molten rock from deep within the Earth. But how full is the chamber now? How much more pressure can the crust withstand before the rock begins to fail in a different way? The science can show us that the gun is being loaded. It cannot yet tell us with certainty when the trigger will be pulled. So, 3 questions hang over the Pacific Northwest tonight. First, how will the structural changes from the 2004-2008 dome building eruption influence the next blast? Will it be forced upwards, or will it find a new path of least resistance to the side? Second, with the ongoing recharge confirmed, are we witnessing the beginning of a multi-year process that could lead to another slow dome building phase? Or is this the prelude to a far more rapid and violent release of energy? And finally, the most critical question of all, after revolutionizing the science of volcanology, after establishing one of the most sophisticated monitoring networks on the planet, can science truly prevent another tragedy like the one that befell the 51 people who died in the safe zones? Or will the mountain, in its next great act, find another way to break the rules? The tremors of early 2024 have faded. The weekly USGS update lists the activity as normal, but miles below the crater, in the silent, crushing dark of the Earth's crust, the process continues. Molten rock, buoyant and unstoppable, is moving. It is filling the empty spaces, stressing the old fractures, accumulating, drop by drop, the power for the next eruption. The engineers on the Toutle River continue their work, reinforcing our world against the last disaster. And deep beneath them, the volcano prepares for the next one. The recharge is happening now. The magma is rising to meet the fractured summit. And somewhere inside the mountain, the fuse for the eruption nobody expects is quietly being lit.